blood? Of course not. Yeshua's not saying you should literally do that, obviously, but he's trying to get through their paradigms and give them this whole metaphor to shift everything in their head. He says, look, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood possesses everlasting life, and I shall raise him up in the last day. For my flesh is truly food, and my blood is truly drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood stays in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me shall live because of me. This is the bread which came down out of the heaven, not as your fathers ate the manna and died. He who eats this bread shall live forever. He said this in a congregation, teaching in Capernaum. Now, so he's talking to a Jewish audience in a congregation. And so he's sitting there going, wow. And he's laying this all out there. Now, first of all, one of the metaphors that we can hopefully see is that we're bringing us back to an event that happened when Moses brought Israel out of Egypt, right? Now, what happened along the way? Well, they got this thing called manna. And they were being taught about the Sabbath. They hadn't gotten to Sinai yet. And they're learning about this manna thing. And manna in Hebrew, manna, simply means, what's this? And so they didn't know what to call it. So it's the original whatchamacallit. We didn't know what to call it, so they call it the what's this. Okay? Hey, can I have a bowl of what's this, please? You know, I heard it tastes like coriander seed. But the thing is, that's why it's called manna, or it's really manna in the Hebrew. Now, something else happened when they got to Sinai. There was the bread that came out of heaven, because what came out of heaven? Yahweh gave them the commandments, the Torah. And that's what's linked to life. And we're going to see how that links together. By the way, in Deuteronomy, we're told very much that we're not to live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of Yahweh, right? Man is not to live by bread alone. Well, that verse, which comes out of Deuteronomy and in other places, should help us understand the linkage between these things, okay? And by the way, that is out of Deuteronomy, after my favorite verse, Deuteronomy 8:2. It's actually in verse 3, where he says, and he humbled you and let you suffer hunger and fed you manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of Yahweh. So this is what gave them true life. This is what they needed to live by. And so he's linking himself to that, to Torah. Of course, they're thinking your flesh, your blood. They're all confused because they're not allowing it to sink in so they can go, wait a minute, he can't be talking about that. What is he really talking about? Continuing in verse 61, Yeshua, knowing within himself that his taught ones were grumbling about this as well, said to them, does this make you stumble? He says, what if you see the son of Adam going up where he was before? It is the Spirit, now listen, see this, we're going to link the Ruach in here. It is the Spirit that gives life, the flesh does not profit at all. Now, we could stop there, and Christianity probably does often, and misses the point. The point is, the words that I speak to you are spirit and are life. You see, this can get into that sort of ethereal spirit thing Christianity likes to get into if they don't listen to the rest of the verse. And some of you may have heard it taught that way in some time. But he's saying the Spirit gives life. Oh, that's the Spirit, the third part of the Trinity. No, there is no third part of the Trinity. There is no Trinity, and he's not talking about that. He tells you exactly what he's talking about if you just listen a little longer. He says, my words that come out of my mouth, the words that I speak, they are the Spirit that keeps you and gives you life. That's what I'm referring to. My words that I speak are spirit and are life. And so now you link that back to him saying that which came down from heaven. Now you go back to Exodus and what came down from heaven, the Torah. This is where we go back to our loop that we like to use. Excuse me. Where in John 14 and verse 6, Yeshua says, I am the truth. And then we go to Psalm 119, verse 142, verse 160. Both of them basically say the Torah or the Word is truth. And then you go back to John 1, and it says in verse 14 that the Word or the Torah put on flesh. There's your loop. Yeshua is the walking, talking, living Torah. And so, of course, his words, which come out of the essence of who and what he is, are life, and they are spirit, and they are truth, and they're the Torah. The same thing that came down from heaven. So when he talks about that which comes down from heaven, he's referring to himself. He's also referring to the Torah. He's giving them a deeper understanding of what happened in Exodus chapter 20. And that's what we need to understand, the linkage between these things. But again, if you haven't studied, if you haven't had that stuff put in there, the Spirit, the Ruach, cannot link those things for you. Because that's what the Ruach's supposed to do. Bring to remembrance, make connections. Be the teacher, helping you to but the Ruach is teaching you, not, in most cases, not direct downloads, not spontaneous knowledge. It's connecting what you have. So if you're not liking what you're getting because there's limitations in your connections, you haven't put enough in. Go get more and put it in there. You're not studying your book enough. You're not giving it enough raw material to work with. Okay? If I go and want you to build a house and I give you a couple of boards of wood and some nails, you're not going to get much of a house. You need more supplies than that, right? Even though you may be given the knowledge of how to connect them together, so you don't need blueprints necessarily, but you need the raw materials. So you got to study. You got to put. That's why we do the Torah portions every week, because most of what Yeshua talks about and those other people in the New Testament talk about is referring back to the stuff that's in the Torah portions and what the prophets said. So if you haven't read the prophets and haven't read the Torah portions on enough of a regular basis, you can't connect these dots together. It won't make any sense. So here he's saying, look, he realized that they were stumbling. He goes, look, does this make you stumble? Well, what if I go and do these things? He said, look, you're not understanding. It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh does not profit at all. The words that I speak to you are spirit and are life. But there are some of you who do not believe. For Yeshua knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe and who would deliver him up. He says, and he said, because of this I have said to you, unless, and listen now, I said to you that no one is able to come to me unless it has been given to him by my Father. So stop knocking on doors in the morning and waking people up and trying to get them to come to Yeshua. He says, no one. Does that leave room for anything? No. No one. That's it. That's everybody. There's no one is able to come to me unless it has been given to him by my Father. Now you may say, well, I'm just working for the Father, trying to do all that job for. No, let the Father draw somebody to you, and then you can do the work. It's not your job to go finding and chasing them down. If the Father is drawing them, they will be seeking and searching for someone to give them some answers. And then if they come across you, hopefully you're trained and ready. Because be careful, whatever you give them, if it's wrong, it's on you. And there's an overabundance of people out there very happy to give you information that's wrong. They don't know it's wrong, though, because they haven't been trained. They haven't gone through enough training. You know, I've said this 1,000 times. I'm going to say it again today. If you've been walking this walk out 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you haven't even walked it long enough to know what you don't know. Because you thought, oh, I fixed my days that I keep and my observances, and I fixed how I eat, so now I know. No, you haven't even, because the doctrinal stuff, the positional stuff, is much tougher to unravel. The lexicon, you don't even realize how messed up your lexicon is. In other words, you read a word, you think you know what it means, and it's completely upside down and backwards. Almost all of you, before you really got, I'm hoping, I'm not saying that I'm so great, whatever, but before you heard the teaching on grace, had grace completely upside down and inside out. Salvation completely upside down and inside out. Understanding what Kadosh was inside. I mean, the churches and the backgrounds that you all have did not do a good job of giving you the definition of the terms, the lexicon. And you're not going to realize all of that in your first 3 and 4 and 5 years. Now, you can accelerate the process by finding an anointed, appointed teacher who can start feeding that into you and accelerate the process. But if you're just fishing for it on your own, it's going to take a lot longer. Okay? That teaching I did on the search for the doctrine of grace, I did that after walking this out for 30 years. And that changed my whole paradigm. Before I did that teaching was in a whole different place, just like everybody else's was. And so what does that go to show you? We should always be growing in knowledge and growing in understanding. Now, I know you know the verse says growing in grace, but see, if you don't know what grace means, I can't use that verse for you right now. Because if I say the verse that says you should be growing in grace and knowledge, well, if you don't know what grace is, that doesn't help you very much, does it? Or if you think you know and you're wrong. that doesn't help you very much. So let's just stick to growing in knowledge and understanding. You should be growing and increasing in that over time. Clarity should be coming in over time. Error should be being weeded out over time. That's actually a good metaphor, the weeding out. You don't realize how much weeds is growing in your lawn right now. But you've been doing this for a couple of years and think that you've got this perfect lawn, all nicely mowed and no weeds. Oh, no. There's piles of it everywhere because the indoctrination, the misdirection, the deceiving that the enemy's done through the church system is so pervasive and so thorough. It's going to take you a long time to even realize the tendrils that are still there that you think you've gotten already rid of, but you haven't. It is insidious, quite frankly. Okay? And so as we're going through this, he says, look, no one is able to come to me unless it is given to him by my Father. From then on, listen now, this is the scary part. From then on, many of his taught ones withdrew and were not walking with him. His own students, not just people that heard of him as they walked. It says his taught ones would not walk with him anymore. So I guess I shouldn't, be that upset when people don't walk with me anymore, because I'm certainly nowhere compared to him. And even his own taught ones wouldn't walk with him after they couldn't handle some of the things he said. I mean, that's really strange. You sit there going, wow. His own taught ones. And Yeshua therefore said to the 12. Now remember, this is not the 12. Remember, he had more students than that. He said to the 12, he goes, do you wish to go away also? Then Shimon Kepha said, Master. Now this is where we need to get eventually. And say, Master, to whom shall we go? You possess the words of everlasting life. The words of everlasting life. The words. Okay, so, the words of everlasting life means you have things that you say that if we understand them and do them, lead to everlasting life. It's not like the words are an incantation in magic, like if you say these words, ta-da, you'll live forever. He's saying you have the understanding and the knowledge, and it's in your words. You share that in your words, and you explain and you teach, and you give us this information that leads to everlasting life. And we have believed, and we know that you are the Mashiach, the Son of the living Elohim. Yeshua answered them, said, have I not chosen you, the 12? And then he goes into showing that there was one that was not exactly with them. But understand, we need to embrace verse 68. All of us should be able to say, Master, to where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? Now, I know that a lot of people think I've gotten very cultish sounding and this and that because it's being misrepresented on the internet that somehow I've told everybody they need to only listen to me and nobody else. I've never said that. I've never said that. What I have said, though, is if you have found a teacher and that teacher is now your teacher, that if you are listening to other teachers and those other teachers say anything different than your teacher, you need to go to your teacher and clarify that with your teacher. Don't allow others to cause a stumbling block between you and your teacher. Now, if you're hearing enough stuff that makes you decide that you no longer want that teacher, fine, go and find yourself another teacher. But as long as that one is your teacher, you need to respect that and go to that teacher and run past that teacher. Teacher, I've heard this, and it doesn't match up with what you said, and I don't know how to reconcile that. Go to your teacher. Because even in the understanding of this, Master, to whom shall we go? Let's understand that this is a discipleship process, something that has not really been taught well for about 2,000 years. I'm going to assume it was actually taught reasonably well for the first 100 or so years after Yeshua was resurrected, but we've lost this whole discipleship thing. And he's saying here, look, you are my students, and I am teaching you, and you recognize all of that. I said, do you want to leave me as your teacher? So it's not just him saying, do you want to leave me as the Son of the Father? Do you want to leave me as God in the flesh? Do you want whatever you want to put it? He's saying, no, do you want to leave me as my, do you no longer want to be discipled by me? And what does he say? He said, Master, not just where can we go, to whom shall we go? Who is going to give us the words of life? If you have found a teacher that possesses the words of life, in other words, understands what Yeshua has said and can teach you what Yeshua meant and understand what he was doing and can give you that words of life, you need to say the same thing. Well, where would I go? Who else is out there teaching this? Well, you know what? Sadly, there's such a wide variety of what's being taught out there. It's hard. At least I could say that there's very few that are teaching the same thing as any other two. You go ahead and start picking them up and saying, show me how many of them actually match with each other. And the mess that's out there. So am I saying, well, then I'm the only one with the answers? No, I'm not saying that. But if you're my student and you believe that I am teaching you Yeshua, showing you Yeshua, giving you words of life, because I'm trying to explain, because remember, my job as a discipler, for you as a disciple, is to teach you of my teacher, to lead you in that direction. I'm only supposed to be the conduit. Okay? So if anybody out there is trying to promote, it's a lot of nonsense. I have no interest in anybody being about me. You should only be interested if I'm pointing you towards an understanding of my teacher, who ultimately is still your teacher too, but he works through people. That's why people were in congregations led by Shaul, or they were people that were led by Yaakov or Kepha or any of the other ones who were sent out to lead, and they were saying, I want to teach you about my teacher. They didn't say, I want to just introduce you to him and leave you on your own. Because this ooey-gooey thing called the Spirit is just going to come and tell you everything. No, we need somebody to share and to give discernment and understanding and piece the puzzle together. That's called teaching and instruction. That's scriptural. I've got a whole teaching called Learn and Teach the Torah, which absolutely will defend the fact that they're supposed to be Torah teachers. There's no scriptural basis for you just being self-taught. Zero. Not that, you say, well, that's all condescending to you, not thinking that we could teach ourselves. I'm just telling you what the book says. There was always supposed to be those who were teaching. And by the way, even as the teacher, I'm still supposed to be learning from others. And I do. Robert can tell you, my wife can tell you, if you're at my house, a lot of the time when I'm working, I've got somebody who's teaching in the background. I'm trying to learn something from somebody, so that I can glean and discern. But I'm expecting the Ruach to help me filter through that mess so that I can then take whatever's there that's useful and make use of it and ignore the rest. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay? But I listen to dozens of teachings a week. Now, when I say listen to dozens of teachings, sometimes I'm listening to them because they're people I'm discipling and I got to be able to help them, give them constructive criticism. Sometimes it's a subject matter that I've not studied, that someone else has studied, that I'm hoping to glean some insight, on, so I save me the effort of having to do my own study, right? Isn't that part of the nice thing of having a teacher, is that they can do the heavy lifting? But the problem is you still have to do the heavy verification. They may have done the heavy lifting, but you have to be Berean. You've got to go and study it out for yourself. And make sure. And a lot of these people are out there presenting their speculation as fact. Don't accept that. Don't let them get away with that. If I speculate, you'll hear me saying, this is my guess. This is my way of putting it together. This is my speculation. All right, continuing now, let's go to John chapter 7. Okay? So we're starting to see that Yeshua here is referring to the Spirit in clearly not an entity type of way. He's saying, my words are Spirit. Now, we should actually take a pause here before we go to John chapter 7 and just reiterate something from another teaching. All right, there is a point in Scripture where it talks about that the Father is seeking those that will worship Him in spirit and truth. Now, this connects up to John chapter 6, because here Yeshua said, my words are spirit. And He's told you, I am the truth. So He's saying the Father is seeking those that will worship Him in the fullness of Yeshua, in understanding His words and understanding that He is the truth. And so the way I've broken it down, my guess is that truth means the mechanics of it and spirit means the fullness of the intent. And we have it in Focus, I think, that covers that, okay? The fullness of the intent. So in other words, what he's saying here, it is the spirit, the fullness of the intent, that gives life. The mechanics doesn't give you life. So when people want to say, well, that works are not whatever, well, on some level they're right. Doing works in themselves does not give you life. Doing the works within the context of the fullness of the intent does lead to life. Hopefully, I know that sounds subtle, but it's also very profound. It's how He intended it. He explains this in His very first messages in Matthew when He says, you've heard of old not to commit adultery, but I'm telling you the fullness of the intent was that you wouldn't even lust to do it. And so the mechanical thing of saying, well, I'm okay, I never committed adultery. Oh, man, but you dreamed about it. So that doesn't bring life. Because Abba doesn't want to spend forever with someone who dreamed about it just because you get a big gold star because you didn't do it. there's no character development in that. And so the fullness of the intent, like thou shalt not murder, he says, look, I'm telling you that you shouldn't even be saying racha to your brother and getting angry without cause and all these other things because you wanted to kill him. Just because you didn't do it doesn't really get you a big, smiley face sticker. Okay, so when he says here in John, this connects up to where it says, worship him in spirit and truth. He says, my words are spirit. I want you to worship me and worship the Father in Yeshua's words and in his context of truth by walking it and living it out. Is this making more sense? Okay? Now, John chapter 7. I was wrong. We're not going to make this thing shorter. Okay, John chapter 7, verse 33. Okay, therefore Yeshua said to them, yet a little while I am with you, then I go to him who sent me. So this is still continuing similar thought to where he was in John chapter 6 when he said, what are you going to think if the Son of Man goes back to where he came from, right? He says, yet a little while I am with you, and then I'm going to go to him who sent me. You shall seek me, and you shall not find me, and where I am you are unable to come. The Yehudim therefore said to themselves, where is he about to go that we shall not find him? Is he about to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and to teach the Greeks? So the Jews understood that Mashiach was going to have a message to go out to those that were scattered. So they were understand. Well, is he the one? Is he going to go do that? And so they didn't understand. He says, what is this word which he said, you shall seek me, you shall not find me, and where I am, you are unable to come. And on the last day, the great day of the festival, Yeshua stood and cried out. Now, this is likely Shemini Atzeret, because that is a day that's referred to often as the last day, the great day of the feast. Okay? Because really, Sukkot is not 8 days. Sukkot is 7 days. The 8th day is a separate festival called the last great day or the 8th day festival, why we call it Shemini Atzeret, or the 8th day festival. Okay? So it's likely that this is at the end of Sukkot. And he stood up and he said and cried aloud, saying it to everyone, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me, and let him who believes in me drink. And as the scripture said, out of his innermost shall flow rivers of living water. Now realize this is still connecting to John when he said, if you drink of my blood, eat of my flesh. Now he's giving a little bit more clarity what he means by drinking. He says, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me, and let him who believes in me drink. And he quotes Scripture. He says, as the Scripture said, out of his innermost shall flow rivers of living water. Now, we're going to take a little bit of a side excursion here dealing with the rivers of living water thing, but I want to continue to finish this section here, 2 more verses, and then we'll get into it. So, and this he said concerning the Spirit, which those believing in him were about to receive, for the set-apart Spirit was not yet given, because Yeshua was not yet esteemed. Now, we're going to get to that whole thing about it yet not, it was not yet. Of course, the word given is added, by the way. That's not actually in the Greek anywhere. That's why it's italics in your Bible. That doesn't mean that it should say given there, but just it says the set-apart Spirit was not yet, because Yeshua was not yet esteemed. Many from the crowd, when they heard this, now listen now, this is going to be a key to lining this up. Many from the crowd, when they heard this word, they said, this truly is the prophet. Not a prophet, but the prophet. Okay, so let's go on this little journey connecting these dots. Because he's saying this idea about this rivers of living water, and he's connecting it up to say that this was concerning the Ruach, or the Spirit. And so, and it says, which was not yet given. Okay? Now, where we end up with this may completely take you by surprise. But it's going to be a fun ride. But it's not referring to Acts chapter 2. And we'll see that when we look at the verses that talk about the rivers of living water. Okay? I'm going to give you a hint. This is talking about when he returns. This is talking about a whole different thing. But yet everybody has taken this verse to think he was talking about Acts chapter 2. But it's connected to the previous verse, which talks about out of his innermost shall flow rivers of living water. So we have to understand that first before we can understand what he's talking about concerning the Spirit. Because it says, this he said concerning the Spirit. What's the this? The innermost flowing of, out of his innermost flowing of living waters, right? We got to